Hi, everybody. Welcome to our virtual panel on remote hiring at scale. First of all, thank you to Guidewire for Denise and Ian. We'll intro them in just a moment for joining. And thank you to our sponsor, Lever. So we can go ahead and take a look at the agenda for today. All right, so first of all, we'll go into introductions. I'll introduce myself and a little bit of background on Codility. And then we will move into Ian and Denise giving a couple of introductions. From there, we'll move into an interactive discussion between Denise and Ian. And lastly, there will be time for Q&A. So we do really want to keep the conversation engaging. So for all of you audience members, which good morning and good evening, by the way, we do encourage everybody to use the chat functionality in order to introduce yourselves and share your experience. There's also going to be time for Q&A at the end, so that's where you can absolutely add questions as we go, and we'll be addressing those questions as we get to the Q&A portion. So feel free, again, use the chat functionality, introduce yourselves, tell a little bit about your experiences. Feel free to kind of chime in on the discussion and add any questions that you'd like us to bring up during the Q&A section at the end. Okay, so introductions. I'm Vivian Rackover. I am a senior account executive with Codility. So I've been with Codility for a little bit over 4 years now. I've seen a lot of changes in the way that companies are attracting and hiring technical talent, and especially as things have shifted over the last 6 months to become fully remote. Some background on Codility: we have been helping customers to hire and assess the best technical talent and provide the best possible candidate experience to their pipeline for over 10 years now. So we have over a decade of experience, and again, things have shifted very much, as everybody knows, over the last 6 months or so. So Ian and Denise, Denise, if you want to start off and just give a quick introduction on yourself, your role with Guidewire, and a little bit of insight into the conversation that we'll be having today.
Yeah, thanks, Vivian. So Denise Airlie is my name, and I'm Director of Talent Attraction for our international team at Guidewire. I've been with the company now for almost 8 years, literally starting as a first recruiter on the ground, right through to building up our own teams across EMEA specifically, and was happy to say that I was the Codility champion that helped get you guys across the line and introduced to Guidewire initially. And today we're really talking about how we've had to pivot, much like the entire world, to completely digital experience and remote hiring, while still maintaining great standards and strong engagement.
Thank you, Denise. And Ian, if you'd like to give a quick introduction.
Sure, thanks, Vivian. So my name is Ian Doyle. I'm a consulting manager in the Guidewire Services Centre based in Dublin. So I'm with the company just a little over Denise. I beat her, I think, by about 6 months, although who's really counting? So just over 8 years now. But I suppose when we both joined Guidewire, it was a very different company. I think Dublin was a very different office, and I think we've seen it grow a huge amount through various different teams over the last number of years. So the team I work on hires a huge amount of graduates every year and internships, and that, you know, that pipeline is very important to us. So I work very closely with Denise and her team in terms of making sure our process is fit for purpose, the technical skills are fit for purpose, and that we're hiring the best possible talent we can, both in our Dublin offices, and then we have 4 offices around the world, in San Jose, in Exeter outside Philadelphia, and Madrid, and a recently enough opened up office in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia too.
Thank you, Ian. So let's get talking. So the first question, guys, this is going to be the big one that I think everybody wants to really hear. Tell us about how you transitioned to remote interviewing and remote work, especially as it pertains to the fully remote culture that the entire world is experiencing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'll start, Ian.
Yep.
So we had 24 hours notice to turn around what was an already scheduled interview day for Ian's team, and we made the decision between us, and it was a tough decision because we didn't want people to have a poor experience because we hadn't done it fully remote before. The hiring teams were very nervous of making a decision without actually meeting someone in person. They hadn't really done that before, so this was a whole new experience for them, and they wanted to, you know, make it the right experience for everyone. But we decided, look, let's take away the stress from it and say, look, let's have the experience, because people have already booked time in their day to travel, to come to an interview, even though they won't be traveling. But we'll give them the experience. We'll explain it won't be perfect, but we'll try our best to really understand if these candidates are a good fit. But the stress is taken away from the hiring managers, that they don't have to decide yes or no if they feel that they didn't get enough information on the day. And I think that was the game changer, that it made people feel a little bit more comfortable that, okay, I can try this out. I don't need to make, you know, what I feel might be the wrong decision, but we can talk about it afterwards, and we can sense and respond and adapt, you know, much like an agile team would. And that's how we got started anyway. And just the end result of that was actually we ended up hiring 4 out of the 6 people that came to the day virtually. So it was a success, but we did adapt. And maybe Ian, you could talk to that, you know, the challenges.
Yeah, so I suppose we got an email on a Sunday night. I suppose, look, like a lot of people probably on this call, saying that, like, look, from Monday, just no one is in offices, there's no unnecessary travel. And as a company that travels an awful lot because we have a consultancy organization that kind of spans the world, it was a big change for us. And obviously the knock-on effect for us was that we had interviews on a Tuesday morning. And I suppose what Denise was probably too kind to say is that I was one of the people strongly advocating for delaying. I was, you know, I just thought, look, let's just push this out a week. And I suppose in retrospect, I was wrong. It was the wrong thing to do. That Denise was completely right in her assertion that, you know, we could go ahead with this. And I suppose what I really found very enlightening by it was that all of the ethos of the interview process that we had instilled in people, and we put a huge amount of faith in the interviewer. So, you know, through our interview process from very early on, you might have people who are 12, 18 months in the company actually assessing code tests and doing technical reviews at an early stage of people, all the way up then to the people who do face-to-face. We constantly instill in them that, look, you could be working with this person. So on every level, you have to make this decision, you know, that you are bought into them joining the company. And I think what that means is that people really take it very seriously. And I think, you know, what really kind of helped us and what made it very much an easy transition for us was that people took it just as seriously. They said, right, okay, I'm on a virtual call now where I might be in a room with someone, but I will still take the same level of interview skills to bear. I will still talk to them. I will still take a little bit more time. I'll figure out ways to probe and ask the same questions and find out things that are important, and then give the interview team good feedback about how we might improve this going forward. And like Denise said, I think on that first interview day, we did hire 4 of the 6 people, and they actually turned out to be excellent hires because they joined my team. And since then, I suppose we've just adapted. We have obviously changed some things. We've built up some really good collateral around it. We've changed our training. But I think fundamentally, actually, what we look for and the key skills and attributes of people hasn't actually changed. And we haven't necessarily let this change or what we look for. We certainly has been challenging, but it's also been an opportunity to explore new ways of looking at skills. So new ways of using Code Live and things like that on the Codility platform that allow us to assess skills in a different way. And I suppose one of the ethos, again, we had at the very start was that look at the opportunity here. Don't always just look at the negatives and say, well, we can't do what we did before, because that's just the world. Like, you know, as a software company, we can never do what we did before. Every year we reinvent ourselves, and this was necessarily no different. So it's just about how you take that, you adapt to it, you're methodical, you have open communication, you allow people to have a voice, and then you learn from the different things you're doing. And I think over the last couple of months, we have actually made a very robust and very positive interview process that actually probably was better than what we had before.
It's incredible to think, actually. I was counting up how many people we've hired globally since lockdown, and it's 400 people, and 370 odd of those are all fully remote, people we've never actually met in person. That's like incredible.
That is incredible. Oh, you go ahead, Ian.
Sorry, I just say we have had some of the best hires I think we've ever had. I was just talking to Joanne, who kind of runs our kind of campus and graduate recruiting pipeline, and with Denise, and we were saying like we've seen some of the best hires we've ever had. And like if you had said to me a year ago that some of the best people we're going to have are people that you hired remotely, never met, I would have kind of scoffed at this idea, and I think I had to let go of that a little bit. That this idea that I couldn't, unless I was in a room with someone, unless I could see the whites of their eyes, I couldn't trust them. I couldn't know who they were, and that was really a limitation in me. It was a limitation in my mind. And I think, to be fair, Denise, you saw that more than we did. You saw it clearer than we did, because I had to let that go. And I think once I embraced it, and once I kind of saw the positive results that could come out of that, it has been quite enlightening.
See, I trust our process. That's the thing. You know,
Yeah.
there's several touch points on the journey to really understand about the person, for them to understand about it, us as much as we want to understand about them. You know, it's about making an informed decision. And also, it really makes you think about unconscious bias, doesn't it? In a big way, and trying to eradicate that.
And one of the things that I've heard both of you say, the word that I keep hearing that's, I think, such a big piece of this is change, right? And naturally, there's always going to be some level of change resistance among teams. And what really happened, especially since you guys had a 24-hour pivot, which, you know, considering the major changes you had to go through is like a blink of an eye. So can you talk a little bit more about, like, almost take us through some of that, the 24 hours, and then also into some of the ongoing iterations? How were you able to help the teams feel more comfortable with the changes that were coming and handle the change management so that it wasn't doing a complete 180, but was still allowing you guys to make the adjustments that you needed to make as quickly as you did?
We tried to keep as much of the process as possible, didn't we, Ian? I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of, you know, we've already used Codility, we've had a remote phone screen. This was just about the face-to-face interview that we normally had. So we had a prep session. So it was more a case of, right, everyone, let's get in a room virtually and let's talk about what your concerns are. Let's talk about what success looks like on the day. What do you want to get out of it? If you have serious concerns, as I said earlier, at the end of the process, then we will pause or we will add an extra step and we'll figure out how we can make you feel like you're making an informed decision, whether it's a yes or a no, that they can stand by that decision. And then we do a debrief we did a debrief at the end of the interview panel as quickly as possible after the session, so that people could again then give their hire no hire decision and talk through any concerns they had. And they had that, you know, that unique sense of, if I say no, if I'm not sure, then that's it. We don't move forward. So we gave people the power, we empowered them to be able to have that unique vote to say, I don't want to move forward, I'm not comfortable. So that made it easier for them.
Yeah, and we were also, I suppose, lucky in that we do have a very, very well-established, very experienced interview team. So, like, you know, they had been through other types of change, obviously not as dramatic as this, but other types of change. So again, I think, you know, we were confident in their abilities. We had good documentation around a lot of the process, but one of the things we definitely did within the first couple of weeks was document everything. And even the things that we might have thought were obvious, that were assumed that you didn't really document, we documented everything about roles and responsibilities, about who runs that roundtable at the end, about who gets a voice, about, like, you know, clearly putting down that if you're unsure, it's probably a no. Even kind of putting down in black and white on a conference page or SharePoint that these things are there. And to be honest, it was always our habit to do that. But I think rather than just make the assumption that because we were all, you know, co-located together and physically located together, that these things just become part of your institutional memory, they are down there in black and white. So you're kind of like putting it down a set of rules almost. So that did help us an awful lot. And then over the next couple of months, we did kind of change some of our process around creating more formalized question banks and technical question banks for people as well, in order to kind of help them with that and onboard them as well.
Yeah, and then elements of automating the process. We had implemented Lever actually as our new ATS during lockdown, and we'd sort of upgraded what we were doing with Codility, and we'd introduced Miro boards. So for some element of, you know, the visual whiteboarding piece around problem solving, or, you know, even getting involved in daily work with, you know, in terms of Scrum teams and things like that. I mean, Ian, I don't know how you felt about using tools and what might have, you know, been useful for you.
Miro's a really good one. So Miro's a really interesting story in that Miro was relatively new to the company, kind of came in just before lockdown. So, you know, perfect timing, I suppose, in a lot of ways. And the way Miro is being used in our interview process, it's generally used to more senior hires, and we will sometimes use it with graduates, but more at the kind of senior architect level hires. And what we might ask them to do is either prepare something in advance, so maybe an architectural diagram or a high-level design diagram of something they've worked on and talk through it. But it's really to use that collaborative nature of how we would do a normal face-to-face. So we really like kind of, getting in a room with someone, getting on a whiteboard, really probing into the pros and cons of things. And we found Miro to be an excellent tool with that. But to come back to my point, that the way it's being used is that one of our architects in Madrid just kind of had this idea that we could use Miro. We were kind of in a room where we were in a meeting where we were kind of throwing out ideas about how we could do this. He said, like, look, give me a day, let me build up something on Miro, let me build up some examples and some guides and come back to you. And that really became our process for using Miro. It was very much by design from him, because he does this job. He is an architect. And he said, these are the kind of things I would expect to be asked. These are the kind of skills I would be looking for. So again, a lot of our process is very much led by those people who are doing the interviews, who are the people who do the job that we're hiring. So, I've stepped away from that technical work a lot over the last number of years. So while I can kind of help a process and I can advocate for change and for process and tools and things like that, really I trust those people more to tell me what exactly we should be asking than I would trust myself. And again, that's kind of just a small example of, I think, how our process works and how our interview process works in terms of just allowing people within that to change and adapt it and to kind of put their ideas forward.
And then the live coding, I suppose, using Code Live and such like.
Yeah.
Where you can have that real interactive, collaborative experience with your interviewee, I think really helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, and Code Live is another good one. So you might go, and one question kind of balloons and balloons. And for anyone who's kind of in a software development role on the call, I'm sure you'll be aware that like a single simple question can expand and expand and expand into taking up almost the whole interview. And you might look at that and say, well, you only asked one question, but you really you built on that and built on it and came up with like different ways of looking at the same problem. What you're really trying to drill into is someone's, first of all, their knowledge, because they do have to have a certain level of knowledge, but really it's the 6 months to 12 months to 5 years after that. What's their mindset? What are they like as a problem solver? What do they like to talk to work with, to collaborate on? And I think that's what actually we've used kind of Code Live an awful lot for, because it's simple problems that start, but then the platform gives us the scope and opportunity to really build upon them. And then also have a record of it saved at the end that we can bring into, a roundtable when we're talking with someone and actually kind of go through it and go through examples of it. So it's right there in front of people on a screen, which is incredibly useful.
And just for a little extra background for everyone listening, Code Live is Codility's pair programming functionality. So it allows you to use audio and video to talk to your candidates, hear them, and then go through an actual interactive coding interview, either from just a blank text editor or from pre-selected questions. And there is also the whiteboarding drawing capability there. And Denise, one of the other things that you mentioned was bias. And I know that is something that has been really top of mind. It's always been incredibly important to reduce bias, increase diversity. I think for many reasons, it's even more top of mind right now. So can you guys talk a little bit more about, some of the resources that you use and the processes that you put in place to really help your team focus on hiring a diverse candidate pool and really finding the right people to join the team based on their skill sets and the way they'll work with you, and how remote hiring and remote work has changed that for the better, and what have you learned?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, big question. It's good that it's driven from the top down, actually. So Mike Rosenbaum, our CEO, is our biggest proponent and advocate of really, being intentional about everything we're doing to really make those changes. And it's not easy to do, but nothing great worth doing is ever easy. Well, rarely. So essentially that was important that it was coming from the top down. It was supported as a broad global initiative. He meets with our CHRO Sinead every week to make sure that they're aligned and moving the needle forward every time. Sinead built up this diversity, equity and inclusion community within Global Guidewire, and then people are responsible for certain work streams. So an example would be sourcing. How do we bring more underrepresented groups into the talent funnel at the early stages? we looked at, so these are in progress, and really supporting ERGs and, you know, so many different work streams and great initiatives, but we're actually doing something about it. And then using technology is really interesting. So we just implemented Textio. So that basically is an AI-based tool that helps us build more inclusive language into all of our communications. So we've started now, we've started a major global project, putting all of our job descriptions through Textio and making sure that the language is inclusive, because it's been proven that, you know, a female may look at a job description and they'll say, oh, you know, I can't do 7 out of these 10, so therefore I won't apply. And a male candidate might think, oh, I could learn those and I can do that, so I'm going to give it a try. So, and that's a very simplistic way of saying it, but we want to try and invite more people and make people feel more able to apply to a role, because, you know, it speaks to how they would think about things, right? And also being age appropriate as well, and really thinking inclusively in your language. We're also on the beta program, which I'm really excited about, in Textio for Talent Brand. So essentially that's putting through all of your content, including your career site. So we're going through an entire employer brand refresh, which is being launched in November globally. So we're looking at persona-based hiring, so really speaking to people's behaviours, needs and wants, in particular segmented groups, but also we can use that proactively in terms of, right, let's be proactive in attracting more females into the very technical roles, because, you know, there's a very low percentage of females going into university, never mind, you know, coming into the workplace. So we have to really make sure that we're attracting that talent pool in the right way, and we're getting involved in certain events. We actually brought in a consulting company that was helping us to shift our mindset in unconscious bias, and they've been training our key folks in our people team, and they're now rolling out training across the entire company over the next 6 months, where everyone is touched by diversity and inclusion training, to really just think about things differently. And that includes, we're relaunching a new interview skills training course on the 25th of September. So we've got our first pilot team there, where, you know, people are going to be doing mostly self-directed learning. So we're using platforms like LinkedIn Learning, so they can weave it into their day, because I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm doing more while I'm working remote. So it's working it into their day, and having that work-life balance where they have time to take their kids to school, but they can still, okay, I'll slot in an hour for this particular piece. And then we're having a live workshop with the teams and breakout sessions, and we're weaving in the D&I piece, the unconscious bias piece, hiring for agility, hiring for resilience as well. So, you know, really having people think more about how they deal with, you know, being remote as well. You know, so I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, there's so many other things. It's quite overwhelming how much we could be doing. And, you know, I like the fact that our head of people is also bringing external people in to talk about, you know, stigmatized issues as well, and talking really, you know, frank and honest about it. And, you know, we've had people, you know, breaking down on calls because they've never had this before. So I like this new transparency and honesty about, let's make it a proper community at Guidewire, and make people feel like they really belong and they're in a safe space psychologically as well, you know, to have a voice.
That's beautiful. And has that been easier since things are remote? Are there more challenges that come with that in order to make sure that you're focusing on that diversity and removing the bias?
It's interesting because there's small things, right, that I noticed, being a female in a male-dominated tech environment, and I would be oftentimes go into meetings and I'd be one of 10 people, and 9 of those being male. And, you know, they say that, you know, statistically females are more likely to be interrupted up to 3 times in a meeting more than a male. And I have had that experience, but I've found that with, you know, using certain protocols in meetings and having Zoom, so rather than you know, me maybe being remote with those 9 other guys that are sitting around a table in wherever, let's say Poland or Dublin or whatever, that actually it's a screen full of individuals, and you know, you actually get to interact with each individual in the group more easily. And if you set certain protocols for meetings, and that includes interviews, that you give people space to talk and to listen, and actually using the agile approach to that, there's really good protocols there, and I found that works really well. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just trying to deal with small things and make it a better experience all round is important.
And it sounds like you're really focusing on showing that to your candidates as they go through the interview process. And it sounds like that's been a piece that you've really been focused on when you're setting up remote interviews with your candidates.
Yeah, and I think we need to have more of a, someone called it a swarm approach, you know, that you're swarming in around, making people feel like they matter at every stage in the process. So we're actually doing some of this around, you know, journey mapping and the candidate experience from, someone put it in 4 different stages, as in CX, candidate experience, OX, onboarding experience, EX, employee experience during their journey, and then XX, as in, you know, when they're offboarding and exiting the company, and look at all of the moments within that you can actually make it as a positive and engaging as possible. So we should think about that across the entire journey, from the first moment we reach out to a candidate. You know, what's the tone of voice of our messaging, and you know, are we interacting with them as humans rather than this corporate speak that you see in a lot of communications.
That's an interesting point, Denise, because I think one of the things that we kind of pride ourselves on being very good at in the graduate recruiting space is kind of events, and kind of actually just getting a load of people out to events and putting them in front of, you know, potential candidates. And we almost have this thing that we do give them talking points and things like that, but our overriding, you know, ethos again is tell your story, tell your story, tell your story, tell what resonates with you, be personal, make a connection. And I think even like the first interaction that a lot of people have with Guidewire, because we are competing in a space where we're not a big name, you know, similar to an awful lot of the companies in Dublin, you know, like, so our brand is never going to be the brand of, I'm sure, some of the companies on this call. So, you know, we make an extra effort to say we're going to try and diversify the pool of people who are going out talking. We're going to try and make that representation show. And we do everything from first year talks to interns, to intern groups, to second years, to third years. We do girl coding competitions and things like that. We sponsor events. So for example, one of the people who works in the GSC, she's a BA. So she once a week or once every 2 weeks, back in the olden times, used to go out to her old university and help mentor female students in first year who were struggling with computer science, and mentoring them as much on the technical stuff as the just stick with it. Everyone is struggling. The guys might not talk about it as much, but they're struggling just as much as you are. They're finding this difficult because it's a difficult subject. So things like that, and I suppose making those little interactions at every level kind of diverse and try and represent kind of who we want to be. So certainly like the interview experience is really important, I think, but it's just every interaction we have with people at every level, at every kind of event. And we'd hope that people who come in as graduates to us have maybe seen us 3 or 4 times before at various interactions, be it at events or in classrooms and things like that, you know.
Actually, we didn't talk about the other pilot that we're doing, obviously, is the code test anonymization. Yep. You know, and that's something where it's not going to be easy to do because we have to work out some of the you know, integrations, etc. But we're going to trial it with a small pilot group in the graduate hiring space. And I'm really excited that you're doing that, Ian, yep, in your group, because that eliminates unconscious bias at the first part of the funnel. There's no possibility to have any bias creep into your mindset, you know, conscious or unconscious. So, you know, we don't know how it's going to work for sure, but I think to try these things and say, right, okay, maybe that didn't work, maybe we can try tweak this, but at least we're making that conscious effort to be present in this, you know, and to do something about it.
Yep, absolutely. No, and I actually we had a meeting, a kickoff meeting about it this morning, and there was huge enthusiasm from the team, the interview team, and almost to the point of like, why didn't we do this years ago, you know? Like, I suppose, again, it's quite a generational thing that a lot of the people we hire being young are kind of forcing us to think like this. This is really, really important to them. You know, this is a core part of who they see themselves as. They see themselves as fair. They see themselves as part of a fairer society. You know, from a social point of view, and I think they are kind of very much encouraging us to do this. So which is, I think, really positive, you know, because it definitely keeps us fresh and it keeps us on our toes and it makes us think about these things.
Well, I think it's especially important with the more junior level hiring to have that initial completely objective assessment where you have an anonymized test report. You're not looking at any identifying information. You're not even looking at a resume, because these are people that don't have the experience and the big company names behind them to show off. And so traditionally, most of this interviewing has been done based off of, number one, what school did you go to? And number one, what identifying information is here during an interview, just because it's impossible not to look at those things. And those are some of the things that really, I think, introduce bias at the very top of the funnel, which for junior level recruiting is usually very high volume, and you end up unconsciously eliminating a lot of candidates that would be really stupendous hires just because of some of that unconscious bias. And I think that university hiring has been one of the biggest question marks for a lot of companies. You know, these are things that used to be done exclusively in person. So how have you guys adapted to that, and what do you see as the future for university or junior level hiring, both as it pertains to running these events remotely and how you're adapting to that, and also how that is impacting, or how you see it impacting, the reduction in bias based on anonymized and objective first stage screening?
Actually, go ahead, Ian.
Oh, no, go ahead, Denise. You probably know more about this than me.
I was going to talk about, we're launching this in partnership with, for example, in Ireland, the company's Grad Ireland, the part of GTI Media, and building a career discovery platform. So it's a whole, again, set of experiences where these interns and graduates are going to assessment centres, but it's virtually, but it's within the branding of a Guidewire, for example, and then all of their content is held within that space. So if they need anything around the assessment center, the meetings are all in the tool, in the platform, right through to offering an onboarding, then having their graduate experience, their internship. And we had all of our interns fully remote this year, and I really encourage any companies out there, don't drop your internships. You know, you can give people real genuine experiences, albeit remotely, but you know, I think we've had a great experience with it. So I definitely recommend keep those intern programs up. So we're trialing that at the moment. We've invested in that. There's another one that's similar in the US that we're investing in this year. So it's going to be a fully digital experience. We've done some trialing around gamification of our content online. We're trialing this in Madrid at the moment, actually, because we're doing a persona-based campaign, and it just spoke to that persona that, you know, people are tending to game a bit more when they're locked down at home. And so we've created a series of videos that are, you know, people have to engage with the content and make choices. So we're just thinking outside of the box where we can about how we, you know, give them a good experience and how we interact with those people. I think another thing about campus, because I used to be a campus recruiter, so I love that whole strategic piece around campus when a company really embraces it. One of the bugbears, I have to say, is around, you know, Ivy League. We must hire from these Ivy League schools, particularly in Silicon Valley. And I just say to anyone out there, you're missing a whole raft of very intelligent people who can't afford the fees. You know, the more money you have doesn't mean the more smart, you know, you are, basically. You know, so there's people out there that have overcome amazing challenges in life just to even bootstrap an education, and they're the ones that you want to look at today, because they'll have the resilience to deal with, you know, major shifts in life like this today, you know.
And it's not just the hires, like internships, I think, are really crucially important for that as well, about just giving that student that chance, that 6 months, that 3 months, that 6 weeks, whatever it might be, to just show them, you know, what it can be, and also to kind of to bring them in and say, you have as much right to be here as anyone does. You know, you are here on merit. You are here because we see something in you. And, you know, that is definitely something that we probably unofficially try and do with our internships. Certainly we very much look in terms of intern hiring as, is there a knowledge gap? That's okay. You know, we don't particularly mind. It's like, what does the intern get out of it? What will they walk out of, you know, Guidewire 6 months later, knowing, having not known before than someone else? And we really try and focus on those candidates that we do feel that we can give an awful lot to, that we can give a good experience to, and it will also just challenge us to kind of make sure that we're teaching them as much as possible. So I think, yeah, like I completely agree, Denise. And I think there's some good examples in the GSC. Like one of the best people we've hired over the last number of years. She only has a 1 year, I suppose we would call it a level 7. So it's a short, less than a year kind of Bachelor of Science. It's just like a small degree. But she came from a kind of a mathematical background. So she came from kind of physics and astrophysics background, and she kind of did coding. And when we interviewed her, there were certain knowledge gaps that she had, but she was also so smart. And I was just like, we hired this person, and she has shown a really clear ability to switch skill sets, to take knowledge she has and abstract it to something else, that she will fill in that knowledge in 6 months, maybe a year. But if she's with us for 8 or 9 or 10 years, which we hope she will be, what does it matter? Like, the benefits you get year on year after that are huge. And she has great resilience, even the courage to go and change courses, because she was 2 or 3 years into a career and she went back to college because she felt it wasn't something she was passionate about. So actually having that maturity to go back and do that and bringing that maturity to the job, I think, is gigantic. So again, it speaks to that resilience and that personality that these people have. Whereas if you kind of get someone, and it's not to say that Ivy League colleges and good colleges aren't, you know, easy, because they're very, very difficult. But again, I think having that diversity in terms of the background of your workforce is very important too.
So do you think that remote work has opened up the opportunities for companies to really look outside of the traditional areas where they might be looking for candidates?
Yep.
And have you changed your process of the way that you interview to reflect that or to take advantage of it?
I don't know if we've quite changed our process. We certainly, like, so I would sit in kind of a management group within the GSC, and we are actively having this conversation about, you know, the future of work, very much led by Mike, who's our CEO. And, you know, the way we're doing that is very openly, very transparently, by saying, okay, like, everything's on the table now. All the old rules, all the things that you can say, oh, we could never do that, are gone. And it has given us the freedom to really imagine what a future could look like. So does that future look like maybe 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office, fully remote for some people? Does it give us opportunity to hire people that logistically we couldn't hire because they weren't in Dublin? And Dublin is quite an expensive city. They couldn't afford it, or something like that. So, and the way we're doing that is in collaboration with our team. So we're regularly polling them. We have these cascading conversations every month with our pods, and we ask them, what do you want the future of work to look like? Like, you know, we can't promise you everything, but we want to hear your opinion. We want to think about this, and we want to think about this in a really deep level in terms of culture. What does culture mean for us, for people who don't come into the office? How can we make them buy in as strongly as they do now? How can we make those connections between people? How do we make sure people aren't left behind or left out of those conversations, you know? And again, like, we don't have all the solutions to this, but I think we are really actively looking at all the opportunities that this will bring us, from everything from the kind of people we hire to the kind of interactions those people have, to even this idea that if you're only in the office a day a week, but in that day a week, you're hugely collaborative. You come in because all you want to do is talk to people and interact and bounce ideas off people. I personally love that. I just think it's a fantastic idea that if I go into the office and I know every single other person in there is because they're on the same wavelength as me that day, that all they want to do is just talk about things, collaborate, have ideas, have meetings, really get through. And then maybe 2 or 3 other days you just get heads down and you put yourself into the work. I just think that's fantastic, you know. So the office becomes a place that, by the very nature of it, you know, solicits conversation and solicits kind of interactivity, because people want to be there and they are actively choosing to be engaged in that mindset on that day, as opposed to, well, this is just what I do. I go into the office on Monday, whether I feel that way or not. So again, I think there's massive opportunities here for companies just to kind of really look at how they work and actually, like, build on the great culture that all of them already have.
Yeah, so we're building in that sort of work from anywhere, remote first, long term. You know, it's going to be a permanent state of play, and I think that's great, because then we can really start working on the more longer term environment for people that are working from home. So it started out back in March where our CEO said, right, use $500, whatever you need, if you need a desk and chair at home, or you need a workstation or a screen, just get what you need so that you can make your workspace at home fit for purpose. Now, today, for example, we did a remote ergonomic assessment here, and looking at how people actually are set up at home. And then the next step again is, right, how will that look if we have to stay working from home permanently, or for longer periods of time? We need to ensure the well-being and the welfare of our employees. So like our VP of the talent attraction team, he actually introduced Headspace, so everyone is able to use that for free, and it's an amazing app. I use it all the time. So it's just being able to step away and to be able to meditate and mind yourself, mind your mind and your body, and to make sure that you bring your best self to work, and to make sure that you disconnect from work and take care of yourself. And then the other piece is, because that blurring of lines between work and home life, it's about embracing all of those things that are not perfect, and bring your whole self to work and don't worry about it, and let's figure out how you're at your most productive. Because I know from my own team's perspective, our team has never been more productive than now, than since lockdown. They've actually, I worry more that they're working to burn out. That's my main worry as a people manager at the moment. So we have to mind people, create more of a community sense of feel within the work environments. People are more, more interested in societal impact as well, and as is Guidewire, and that's a big part of our plan for this year. Is we hired a head of ESG, environmental and social governance. She was our former head of HR actually, and really working on building out a plan of action. So yeah, things are shifting. It's just a whole state of impermanence, but really trying to adapt to what's coming ahead, and thinking about the future of what it looks like for our employees, and making it a good place to be and a place to belong, kind of thing. What was it you said? Do you remember, Ian, in the last sort of Monday with Mike? He said something like, be nice, work hard, be nice. Essentially, so that's the new MO. It's
just
like
really drilling it into us there.
Yeah, just be mindful of other people's challenging environments where they're trying to work hard. They've got kids at home. They may have a partner that's a key worker, and they live on that edge every day. They're just not switching off, etc. So it's very much more focused on well-being, I think.
It is interesting. I had a conversation with someone last week, and they were saying that actually, working from home is giving them an insight into people's lives that they never would have had. So they were talking about their manager, who's a nice guy, but very, very focused, very business. And they were saying it's hard to kind of see him in the same light when he's on a meeting and his two children are crawling all over him, and he's like trying to feed the dog or do whatever. And it's just, it has kind of humanized, not that, people were kind of robots before, but I think it has given an insight into people's lives. And I think there's been a renewed understanding of kind of the challenges that some people face. And also just that if you trust people, if you hire the right people, if you engage them in what they do, if you make them feel like they're important, if you make them feel like the job they do is important, and they really buy into that, and you trust them, they will get the work done. And sometimes you have to cut them a little slack. Sometimes you absolutely have to support them. That support can be alternate areas. That support can be take a week off. So I had an email I got on Monday that told me that, one of my pods, he had to go in for a COVID-19 check for his son. And on the same day, he, tore his Achilles tendon or some, his ankle. I just take 3 or 4 days off. Like you're lucky in that you're between projects right now, but even if you weren't, just take the time. Like this is not the time to be worried about what you're going to do or how you're going to catch up with training. So it's things like that, I suppose, just making sure that, if you hire the right people, they will give you back multiples of what you give them in terms of that trust, I think.
Yeah, and then giving them the tools for the constant learning piece, that constant iteration of self, because that's what our tech audience is hungry for. You cannot stand still in the tech sector.
But also letting them tell you what that is. Don't dictate to them what the skills are. Allow them scope and opportunity to build up learning platforms, and that's very much how we run our graduate training platform, is that certainly there's a process and there's a set of skills that kind of we expect people to have, but an awful lot of it as well is our senior people and architects and even our more junior people looking for stuff. So it might be a senior person coming and saying, I have this skill that I'd like to develop a workshop on and maybe build it into a study group. Or your more junior grad saying, I feel this is a gap here, and maybe communicating to me through our Slack channel, and then me being the guy who kind of advocates for it. But it's very much driven by them, you know, and kind of engaging them in that conversation and that sense of community.
Thank you, guys. I think we're going to open up the Q&A section of the panel, and we've had a couple come through already, but I just want to give a quick reminder for everybody else in the audience. Please feel free to use the chat functionality if you have questions that have come up or that come up as we're going through the first couple that have come through. We've got about 13 more minutes to go through some of the questions from the audience. So the first one that we have, Ian and Denise, that came through, I think when we were talking a little bit more about the candidate experience. What are some of the main things that you've seen that, that have really impacted the candidate experience to make sure that you're still providing a very positive and engaging experience for candidates since you can't meet with them in person?
Yeah, I think it's take all the stress out that you can of the experience of interviewing. So our TA team would, you'd have a prep call with the candidate and they'd have questions like, what do I wear to a remote interview? When do I show up? What if my tech doesn't work? And you take all of those simple elements out and you do a prep session and make sure they feel comfortable and in a safe space, ready to go when their interview starts. So these simple things all matter. So making sure that you have good communications all the way through and keep that human contact up throughout the entire process from beginning to end. And then it's important even through the offer process. So we're doing things like automating as much as we can to remove any effort or task on the candidate side. So for example, the offer letter itself, we weren't fully automated, but we just moved that really quickly to fully automating the e-signatures so that people didn't have to go find somewhere to print something off, to sign it, to scan it, to send it back. Very simple thing, but very annoying for the person being offered it, particularly in Poland where you've got so many documents, right? And so yes, that was a big part of it, is just removing those task burdens right through to the onboarding piece where you have everything they need in one space and they know where to go to. Having someone who's a buddy or a mentor is really important so that they can ask the questions that they don't want to ask maybe a hiring manager. Just the general, how do I do this? Where do I go for that? Who do I talk to about this? And just again, humanizing the experience, understanding every moment along the journey so that you can preempt that and try and build in interesting experiences so that they feel like you've really thought about it and they feel welcome then.
And even for those candidates that aren't successful, giving them that feedback if they requested about why not. And we have had experiences where someone has interviewed and we've kind of said for whatever reason, just, technically maybe not now, and they've re-interviewed again in 6 months, 12 months, and we've hired them. We've been more than happy to. So again, I think that's a really positive thing to see in our process, is that, even with, I suppose, a negative outcome for someone, the process itself and the interactions with us are still positive enough that they can kind of come back and kind of say, well, look, I'm going to fill in my gaps. I'm going to fill in whatever, they asked me to, and I'm going to come back again in a couple of months. And I think definitely kind of that idea of giving feedback. So taking every candidate, whether they're the successful ones or not successful, they are just as important, because they have taken the time to interact with you. They have taken the time to kind of talk to you. So they deserve just as much in that sense,
So it sounds like communication is really the key in the beginning of the process when they first apply through to after the interview.
And even communication, and again, I would coach an awful lot of the people kind of who do interviews, and I'm like, start with maybe, especially for grads, a simple question they know, talk to them a little bit about it, build it up. And our interviews aren't interviews. It's not me asking you a list of questions or looking for a bar to jump over. It is a conversation that I make a subjective but informed decision at the end of, do they make it through to the next step? And in a final round interview, that's a hiring. But that it is a conversation, and that conversation can go very different ways. So you might have a plan and 3 or 4 candidates and it completely goes out the window and you end up just talking about something really interesting, and that's fantastic. I love when someone comes into a round table and says, we spent 90% are talking about their final year product. We did a whole final year project, we did a whole architecture of it, we pros and cons, we pulled it apart, we diagrammed it. That's fantastic, that's perfect, you know, because I want that interactivity, I want that conversation. I want them to really try and make a connection with someone, you know?
And that's why I think the what we talked about earlier with having an initial objective screen is so important, because then you know that when you get into these more in-depth, detailed conversations with the candidate that are more subjective, you know that you have, without bias, already figured out that they're going to be technically a good fit, and then you can get into these in-depth subjective things during that remote interview.
And it also allows you the time and space to actually see those skills that a more rigid, formalized process may not. You know, so if you really were looking at knowledge, you know, really heavily through every step of your process, like you don't have an opportunity to see the people who are very different kind of problem solvers, who think about the world in a different way, that are really important to have on a diverse team, you know. So I think that's definitely one of the benefits that we get out of it, having a process like that. So like me as someone who kind of runs and organizes teams, it's like it is about having that mix of people, you know, having that someone who can kind of step back and see the world in a slightly different way and look at problems in a slightly different way that are really, really important to us.
Perfect. We have time for one more question. So another question that we've had from the audience, what new processes supported by technology were the most challenging to implement to manage remote talent attraction successfully?
Yeah, it's a good question. In terms of the challenging processes, I would say it's probably, you know, the problem solving piece, isn't it, Ian? Really, you know, figuring out a way to interact with someone collaboratively, and you know, have an open conversation and feel like it flows like a normal face-to-face interview, and that it feels like it for them.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, again, like that's a huge part of what we do. That first step is, you know, that knowledge step of like, do you have prerequisite knowledge to, you know, be applicable for this job? And then everything after that is, right, let's just talk about problems. Let's talk about data types. Let's talk about loads of different things, and let's just kind of see how your mind works a little bit. Let's have you challenge me on a solution I present and probably be right, to be honest. You know, that kind of stuff I think is really important. And it did take us a little bit of time to adapt to that. And I think there were some people on the panel who, you know, weren't quite sure if they would be able to do the same thing because they're so used to using that whiteboard, and we use whiteboards all the time. Like, so all of our interview rooms have a big whiteboard and we go in, and that's primarily how we interview. But I think we have used Code Live very successfully. And I think once we kind of did some initial training, and once we started talking to the team in terms of, you know, brainstorming about how to use it, it wasn't us dictating, here's how you problem solve in Code Live. It's more like, here's the platform, here's some sample questions, here's some ideas around how you might do it. Here's maybe, you know, if you want to shadow someone on an interview to get a sense of how they're doing it, and then you apply your own technique that you're comfortable with. I think that was really kind of the game changer for us, that it wasn't a top-down rigid approach. It was very much just like, here are the outcomes we expect, but we trust you to determine how best to get them from your personality and from what you see in the candidate real time in the interview.
Another challenge, I think, was between the offer process and starting, where it was the first time ever we had someone actually decline an offer after signing. And then a light bulb moment went off around the experience. Okay, so we haven't met this person in person, and we didn't have that, what we now call the swarm approach, and making sure that between signing and joining that they feel really welcome and they feel engaged with the team. So we had a harsh lesson there to make sure that we had people communicating with the candidate at every possible stage, and, you know, sharing information, connecting with their mentor before they start, and, you know, make it, and even just, you know, this week our new hire in our team, or last Monday rather, we sent him a kudo board, and everybody signed the board and had videos and gifts, and, you know, made it feel like it was a card on his desk on his first day. So we learned from that. It's like, don't forget that time in between signing and joining. It's really important.
Yeah, and then just make sure that we continue that when they start, so it's not as this flurry and then they start, they kind of left it. They're also very much that swarm continues through their first 6 months, 12 months, whatever. And I suppose an acknowledgement that different people are kind of process things in different ways, and different people are different personality types. And when you're all in the office, someone who's maybe slightly more introverted, like, you know, has that support group around them, but, you know, maybe remotely they need a little bit more support. You need to be much more conscious of that person. So you need to, you know, get on calls and do one-to-ones or do whatever really it takes. And maybe it is that, you know, as a good manager, the best thing you could do is set them up with a good buddy, you know, that you yourself may actually kind of, you know, manage them by kind of setting them up with someone that they feel more comfortable with, you know?
Yeah.
So the technologies that have been the most crucial, it sounds like, have been those that give you a lot of structure and being able to build a solid process, which you guys very fortunate to have in place beforehand, that also allow you to streamline, move candidates through the process quickly. When I say the process, I mean both the entire interview hiring funnel and then also onto onboarding and ongoing engagement. So giving you that structure, but also allowing you enough flexibility to drive the conversations with your candidates to make sure that you're finding the people that are going to be the best fit for your teams.
Yeah, actually, and just tools like candidate self-scheduling. So, you know, it's in their hands, then they can figure out a time that suits them. That's been a game changer in itself. It's a small thing, but it's really useful. It takes away the toing and froing to trying to find the time that works for everybody. Yeah.
Okay, so we are just about at the end of the hour. So any last thoughts that you guys have? Any last pieces of advice that we can get through in about 60 seconds?
60 seconds. Just embrace change. Change is opportunity, you know, like it's certainly there are challenges, but if you look at it as a way of kind of saying what does it make us think about and what does it make us improve, it's a great opportunity. And I think that is the way we do things in Guidewire. It's definitely the way we've seen the last couple of months.
And I think also provide the resources to your team to be able to effectuate those changes.
And listen to your team. So, you know, don't assume you have all the answers. All you are is an advocate for providing them what they know. They know what they need better than you do, probably.
Yeah, it's very true, Ian. Very true.
All right, well, Ian, Denise, thank you. We really, really appreciate the insight. Congratulations on navigating through these huge changes so effectively. Your insight is invaluable to the changes that everybody is having to go through right now. And also, again, thank you to Lever for sponsoring the panel today. Thank you to the audience for joining, and have a great rest of your morning or evening, depending on where you are. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone, for joining late in EMEA.